Let me just welcome everybody to the first Nikon Bird Photographers Photography Collaboration Series. Stephen and I have been talking about this for a while, and I just decided to do it. So we had a number of folks over the last year or so, actually, who asked a little bit about Lightroom. And so this is just Lightroom basics. This is an introduction to it. And I use Lightroom myself for all of my photo editing, and I think a bunch of other photographers do as well. There clearly are a lot of other products on the market, so this is just one of them. So we're going to jump in. Just a few little things here. The goal of the overall collaboration series is to help and encourage our group members to be better bird photographers, right? We're just all about that, and we love bird photography, and we know that you guys do too. We're happy to make all these sessions interactive, so questions and comments are welcome. So like I said, you can unmute your mic and feel free to jump into the conversation or put something in the chat window. Our goal is to make this fun and encouraging, and believe me, there are no chips on anybody's shoulders here. I am always learning. I'll make another note about that. There's a lot to learn, and there's always something new to learn. So we're excited about that and excited about the series. We welcome your views and opinions. I'm recording the session, as I said, for future use. Just a little note. Again, if you've got a mic, please mute it if you're not talking, and that's it. All right. How do you get Lightroom? Just a note, if you want to write this down, you can obviously search for it as well. But if you go to www.adobecloud/by/students.html, you'll see that you can get the Adobe Creative Cloud service software for $9.99 a month, which is what I do. And the Creative Cloud, it downloads a little Creative Cloud app. It looks like this, and I'll show it to you in a second when it loads. And there's a cloud version and there's a desktop version, and you can install the desktop version or use the cloud version, whichever one you want. And I use the, hey Jeff, how are you? I see your video there. Anyway, so there's both a desktop version and a cloud version. There's a version for Mac and a version for PC. So I use the PC desktop version, and that's what I'm going to be showing today. And let's see here, my little Creative Cloud is starting up. So Adobe has this little, which you'll see if you download the product, this little Creative Cloud app, and it'll install that, and then you go to apps, and then it shows you all the different applications that Adobe has, so that you can open them, install them, run them, and things like that. So you would download this little creative app and then just come down to Lightroom and click install, and it'll automatically install it on your computer. So just a note there in terms of how you get it and how much it costs. So it's pretty reasonable. Okay, just a note, RAW versus JPEG. When we get into post-editing, which is what we're talking about here, I just want to make a note just so you're aware, because not everyone is. Your camera has a couple of different modes, and it can shoot in either JPEG, and there's multiple sort of, there's fine, basic, and different qualities of JPEG. Or you can tell your camera to shoot RAW, or you can do both, right? So, but just a note, if you're going to do post-editing with a product like Lightroom, Lightroom is able to edit the RAW files from your camera, and RAW files hold a lot more information. So JPEG files, which we eventually all share on Facebook, have 16.8 million colors. 12-bit RAW, which is what my camera does, and some folks' cameras do more, they'll do 14-bit RAW. But 12-bit RAW, and it's not just 16.8 million colors, 12-bit RAW has 68 billion colors. So when you pull your files and stuff into Lightroom, you know that it is it's pulling in all 68 billion colors, and you can use those colors to recover shadows and a whole bunch of other things that we'll talk about. So I encourage you to shoot RAW. This is just me. The files are bigger, of course. Some people are fine with JPEG. It's just my opinion. I like shooting RAW because I like to pull everything I can out of my images. So just a note there. Someone says they can't hear me. Hang on a minute. Oh, someone says I had to start over and I can hear you now. Okay, so can anybody else cannot hear me? Jeff, I know you could hear me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, from Robert. So Robert, can you hear me? If other people can hear me, so I must be getting through. Ann can hear me now. Let's see, Marianne. Do you guys have your speakers turned up, maybe? All right, so Ann can hear me now. All right, I'm going to keep talking. Again, we're recording the session, so if for any reason you can't hear, we are going to post it. Okay, so, but hopefully you can work it out either on your PC speakers or plug in your headphone or whatever, and hopefully you'll be able to hear as we go forward. All right, let's keep going. Just real quick, when you hear people talk about Lightroom, you'll often hear the term workflow. The term workflow is, when I first heard it, I thought it was something really specific, and then I learned that it's just kind of the way people use the software and how they use the software, in what order do they use the different modules of the software, and everybody kind of has their own way of doing things. So I'm going to be showing you sort of my workflow, but as I do that, you'll see, I'll try and demonstrate all the different pieces and parts of Lightroom that I use. And just a note, our cameras have, their own little internal JPEG options, right? There's vivid, and then you can edit those. Actually, you can edit your sharpening and your contrast and your brightness and your saturation and your hue, and you can go in there and tweak these kind of things. And when your camera makes a JPEG image, it'll use those settings, if you will, straight out of the camera when it stores the JPEG on your card. But those settings affect the JPEGs, but they do not affect your RAW file. So the RAW file is just the raw data coming from your camera, and no matter what you set these things to, it doesn't affect your RAW image at all. Okay, so it does affect your JPEG, right? So if you shoot a combination of JPEG and RAW, then your JPEG image will have all these settings sort of baked in, but your RAW image will be just straight out of the camera. All right, so what we're going to do here, instead of when I first got my camera, this is what I did. I just I set a bunch of things in my camera, stored a bunch of JPEGs, and started posting to Facebook. So what we're talking about with Lightroom is we're going to take the files out of our camera, we're going to import them into Lightroom, into what's called the library module, as RAW files. And when we import those files into Lightroom, Lightroom is going to grab them from the memory card. It's going to pull them into your computer and store them on your computer. And I use Windows, so it'll be this PC Pictures. So it creates a catalog. It pulls the RAW files and categorizes all those RAW files by date automatically on your computer. Then you go from the import module of Lightroom, which you'll see, and you go to the develop module, and this is where you pick your shots to edit, where you rank your best shots, you edit your shots with all these different cool things that you can do, and then you eventually export your best shots down back to another folder on your computer, which then you can share to Facebook or print or whatever you want to do. All right, so what we're going to show in this workflow overview is just real quick, we'll walk around Lightroom and I'll show you the different modules, and then we'll go from the import process over to the develop process, and then we will show you a bunch of edits and then export a couple of files. All right, so that's just an overview. this is a little picture of Lightroom, which we're going to show you in a minute, and this is just one little disclaimer. There is a lot I don't know about Lightroom. I've been using it for a couple of years now, and I am always learning. So if I'm in the middle of this and you've got some really great ideas, feel free to text them or tell me, because I'm always open to learning new things. I do personally think when I first started editing, I pulled up both Photoshop and Lightroom, and in my opinion, Lightroom's a lot easier to use than Photoshop. So just my opinion. A lot of people just do everything in Photoshop, but Lightroom's great for me, and it's what I use. Okay, that's all for the preamble. Now we can jump into the demo here. Okay, let me start Lightroom. My little Carolina chickadee there. It's starting. I thought I had it already started up. There we go. Okay, when Lightroom first starts up, you'll see a little splash screen, and you'll be greeted with this overall management, Lightroom photo management program. The little sections in it, just so you're aware, that when I said library and develop, they're right here. So right at the very top, there's a library section, and then there's a develop section. So the library section is where you go to import your photos. So after I take a bunch of pictures, I will go to the library section. Then I will come over here, and here's all my pictures that I've imported. But you click the import button in order to get the pictures into Lightroom, and you come over and usually in my case, if I've got my camera card in my computer, it shows up right here. And you just click on that, and it'll load up. You'll see all the pictures. In fact, let me see. 1 second, let me put in my little card here. I meant to already have that in there. My apologies. Okay, so you can see my Nikon D3300 shows up, and there's the DCM folder, and then there's this folder, and then you can see a bunch of shots. And when you go into the import section, Lightroom is smart enough to know, even if you had tons of other shots on your card, it's smart enough to know what pictures have already been imported and what ones haven't. Okay, so if you want, you can actually go through your little list here, and you can uncheck all, and you can come down here and say, you know, I want this one, import that one. No, don't import that one, because no, I'm not going to even use that one because of the bird's not even looking at the camera. So you can come through if you want and sort of pre-select ones that you want. Normally, it's a little hard for me to see all the details, so sometimes, a lot of times, I'll just import all of them and then deal with that later in the develop module. It's completely up to you from a workflow perspective, but the idea here is that you pick all of the images that you want to import and work on from your card into Lightroom. And when you've done all of that, you just come over here to the right-hand side, and you click Import. And I'll grab this one here, and you click Import. And then Import will grab that file. It'll kind of create a new little section for you to work on, and then you can start working on your newly imported images. I'm not going to work on this image here because I got a bunch of other ones. Let's go back to my folder. So there are a bunch. You can move around different folders if you've got other folders, different dates and things. You can pick different dates of different settings and different images that you've imported. But basically, what you want to do on the library side is you want to get all the images down here that you want imported and have them available in your library. And then when you're all set after your import, you're going to go to your develop module, and this is where we're going to start working on our images. Okay, so let's talk now in the develop module. And by the way, this session here is designed to kind of give you an overview, not super in-depth, detailed training. So there could be, I'm sure that you may have a lot of questions, but if you've got questions specifically, I'll do my best to answer. So in the develop module, when you go there, you can see all of your images down here along the bottom, and you can slide those over, and you can look at them. And typically what I do in my workflow when I first pull my images in, I will look at them to see which ones I really want to work on. So I'll give you an example here. Here's an image. I've got an image of this white-breasted nuthatch, and I've got a couple of them actually. This one's a little dark, and this one isn't, but they both look pretty good. But what I'll typically do is in your little navigator here, there's you can look at different kinds of views of your image. So you can see when I zoom in one-to-one on this particular image, it's a little fuzzy. You know, it's not quite the quality that I normally like to use. I mean, it looked good full screen, but when I zoom in, it's not quite as good as I might like. So what I can do is I can right-click and say, you know, let's set a rating 1 star. And it's just I'm not wowed by that particular picture. And then I'll go to the next one. And then we'll zoom in, and when I take a look at this particular image, oh, that's like a whole different world, right? We've got a lot of clarity. This is a really nice shot. I want to work on this one. So I will right-click and maybe set a rating of 4 or 5. I'll set it to 4. So as I'm working through my images, I will basically flip through all the images and pick the ones that I want and rate them, right? And when I'm done rating them, you can come over here to the filter, and you can say, show me all of the rated images. Actually, only show me everything 4 and better. Show me everything 3 and better, 2 and better, 1 and better, 5 and better. So you have this little filter here, and if you import, and sometimes I do, I might import 200 shots, right? And I'll take a little bit of time and just blast through those shots. Obviously, the shots that I don't like the pose, the bird's not even looking at me, I don't even rate them, right? I'm only going to go through and rate the shots that I think I might be interested in. And then what you can do is you can, which I typically will do, is I'll say, hey, show me all of the unrated shots. In this case, I'm not going to pick any of these, but you can pick all of your unrated shots and say, you know, these shots, I didn't even rate them, and then you can delete them. You can come up here and say remove photo and remove from disk. And what that'll do is, so you started off with 200 shots, and we've just sort of gone through and ranked all the ones we're interested in. And let's say we had 150 shots that we know we don't care about, right? And when you delete them and delete them from disk, they're gone, right? Now, they're still on your little memory card, but they're gone from your computer. And in my case, that's part of my workflow because, frankly, I don't have space for 18 bazillion shots. I really only care about at the end of the day, the 5 or 10 that I really love, right? So I will continue to just weed down the shots to get the very best ones that I like and just get rid of the old ones. So that's what I do. It's just me. So I work through and rank all of my shots that way, and then I start working on the shots that I like. So let's take a couple of shots here and kind of work through some of the develop modules. I'll kind of walk you through all the different features and functions that I normally use and how I use them and kind of what they do. And let's see. Somebody say clicking. Oh, Steve's on. Thanks, Steve, for joining me. Okay, so let's look at now the develop module. So now we've kind of gone through. We've picked the shots that we want to develop, the ones we want to work on. Let's see all the different things that we can do. So over here on the Well, just a note here. If you highlight your picture in the upper left, you can see up here in the upper right, it gives you the ISO, your meter, your f-stop, and your speed. So you can see those right here. You can see this shot was shot at ISO 1600. It was 600 millimeters on my crop sensor f7.1 and 800th of a second. And this particular shot, as I said, when I go through and look at these, I typically zoom in 1-to-1 and make sure, do I have the quality that I really like? This is a very sharp shot. I love it. And this is just the raw file. So now let's go in and decide what we can do. So let's take a look at all the things that we've got. First thing, just to note, and why Lightroom didn't kind of put this at the top, I don't know, but there is a section down here called lens corrections and profiles. And basically, if you click this little remove chromatic aberration box and enable profile corrections, Lightroom will look at your image, figure out what camera and lens you were using, and it has profiles for pretty much all the cameras and lenses that are out there, and it will automatically make profile and chromatic aberration adjustments based on your camera and lens. So it's a good thing to do. With the this particular shot was shot with a Sigma 150 to 600C. There's not a big profile correction that happens. If you're using, if you happen to use kind of a wider angle lens, it'll correct a whole bunch of stuff on your lens. So that's always a good thing to do, sort of right up front, in order before you kind of start editing and looking at your file. All right. So let's walk through all the things at the top, and I'll go through all the elements that I typically use, and then we'll come back and actually mess with them. So, crop overlay. You have an image and you want to crop it. Let's talk about that particular idea. So here's an image of a Hummer. Pretty decent quality. I'm happy with it, but gosh, I got this Hummer feeder over here. I really don't want that in the shot. So you can click your crop tool and you can sort of drag it down until you get an image, right? Maybe we want a little bit of, how much can we do? I don't want that in the shot right there. So, but that's a pretty good view. So there. So now I've got just with the crop tool, I've got a way to look at that shot and work on an edit from this perspective without my little hummingbird feeder in the picture. Within the crop tool as well, there's a whole bunch of things that you can do. I won't go over all of them, but you can, you want to do a 16:9 crop. There's your 16:9 crop, right? You go back to the crop tool. You can. I typically start off with the standard 4:3 crop, or the as shot crop, I mean. And then over time, I will, once I get the shot kind of where I really want it, I may come back and pick different crops for different purposes. So I've got cards, 5x7 cards that I sell online. So I'll come back and do a crop that's 5x7, right? Do a 5x7 crop for that. If I'm producing a crop that I want to use as a background on a computer, then I'll come back and do a 16:9 crop. But again, typically I'll use basically the as shot or the original cropped format or aspect ratio to crop my shot. I normally don't mess. I'll mention these other ones and then we'll come back to them. This particular tool is called spot removal. That's a little more advanced. We'll wait on that. This is red eye correction. You won't need that with birds. There's a graduated filter, which is a way to horizontally start dragging in edits from different angles, but it's horizontal. You can drag them in at any way that you want. I never use that. There's a radial filter, which is a way to select part of your image to apply adjustments. in a circular fashion or an elliptical fashion. I almost never use that. And then there's something called an adjustment brush. This is advanced. We'll cover it at the end. I use it quite a bit in certain circumstances, and then in other circumstances I don't use it at all. So we'll come back to that, the adjustment brush tool. But right now, let's just go through this particular image that I have here and walk through a set of adjustments and talk about the different elements that are there and what you can do with them. Okay, so let's go through them kind of top to bottom. First one is exposure. You will see this on pretty much any tool that you use, but in this case, I shot this shot. I was a little off on my metering, and so it was a little dark. So you can bring up the shot, recover that, and again, I would recommend RAW. If you shoot RAW, you've got the ability to recover more shades and pull stuff out of the picture than you do if you use JPEG. So I will typically work with something. I'll start with something that allows me to see the details of the bird, and then I will typically come in maybe 1.1 to 2 and start looking at the details of the bird, and then come down to some of the other options here. Now, some of these other options, it really depends on the bird and how much, whether or not the picture itself will actually benefit a whole lot from the adjustment. So I'm going to show you here, like the highlights and the shadows are a couple of adjustments. I use these quite a bit. They're not, I don't know that they'll do a whole lot for this, but on other pictures they're indispensable. So, but highlights basically, so you can see kind of this. You'll see the shading of the white here on this hummingbird here, and if I pull down the highlights just a bit, and I want to make a note here, and Stephen and I talked about this, you can completely destroy your image with all these sliders, and what I'm after is just tiny slight adjustments that if the light was maybe just a little better, I would have picked up some of the highlights a little more than maybe what I did, or because I didn't quite have my exposure right. It didn't quite turn out exactly the way that I wanted it. So I'm making tiny adjustments, but you can see here just a little bit different. And I want to make a note here. You've got a couple of proofing options here, and you've got you can compare one shot to another, which is this one, and this one is the before and after view. So just this is helpful a lot of times, but you can kind of see, right? I brought up the exposure and I kind of lost a bit of detail. So by driving down these highlights, I can kind of pick that detail back up, and that helps, right? That helps brighten up the image and the background and everything, and then pull some of that detail back that I lost by pushing the exposure up. And then on the shadows generally I will try and play and see if there's some value in increasing the shadows, just because sometimes, and like I said, with this particular hummingbird shot, there's not a lot of super dark areas that need to be recovered, so I don't really need a lot of shadow, right? It's just not doing a lot. Some other pictures it will. I'll show you a couple of those in a minute on that. We'll pick another shot. Actually, maybe because we're talking about highlights and shadows, let's leave this picture here. Let's jump to another shot where this can make a big difference, right? And it happens a lot when you're dealing with all of my black cap chickadee shots, my Carolina chickadee shots. These guys have black eyes and have a black crown, and if you don't get your exposure just perfect, or the light just perfect, sometimes it's just so dark. It's just a dark eye and a dark. So I'm going to show you here in this particular case what you can do with the highlights and the shadow sliders. So we can maybe bring the exposure up just a bit. And then I'm going to, so when I drop the highlights, you'll see we get a little bit more detail back in the white here. All right. And again, these are small adjustments, but this is, this is right. So I pull that back a little bit, get a little more detail there. And then the shadows, when I raise the shadows, I get just a little bit of definition now between the top of the head and the eye, right? Again, these are not, I'm not sliding it necessarily all the way, but I'm making these tiny adjustments just so I can get a little more definition between the black cap and the eye there. And you can play around with this a little bit, right? At some point, if you push it too far, right, you've sort of destroyed it. It's not natural. But you've got this ability by picture here to come in and just make enough edits here to pick up some of those highlights. Now, I want to make a note here that all these adjustments that I'm making are across the whole image. All right, we will come back and look at the adjustment brush where you can select just a part of the image and make adjustments to just that, right? So, but with this image right here, again, you can see the highlights and the shadows and what that can do for some of your shots, right? It's indispensable for shots like this, right? Okay, let's go back, and I may pop back and forth to different shots as we work through some of these different sliders, because again, some of the sliders have basically some different have different capabilities based on the shot. Okay, so let's go back to the full shot here, back to our ruby-throated hummingbird here, and I'm just going to go to the fit. So we kind of see this now. Did somebody have a question? Okay. I'm more than happy for you guys to interrupt. Hey, Steven, you can interrupt me anytime, man. Please do. I know you use Lightroom, you use a lot. So, okay, next one, highlights and shadows. Then you've got whites and blacks. I don't use this a ton. Sometimes it kind of makes a bit of a difference. If I've got some whites that are just like completely blown out, I might drop the whites just a hair, right? But you can see, if you can completely destroy your shot. But I may take the whites and just dip them ever so slightly. Sometimes, changing the blacks can add a little bit, but in this case, I'm not seeing much of that, right? By the way, after I make a whole bunch, as I go through all my adjustments, I will typically revisit the final exposure and make any final adjustments on the bird itself, or on the picture before I export it. So this histogram up here will give you an idea of where your image is color-wise. It does pick up everything that you're currently looking at in the image. So, I have all this dark green and everything, and so you can see it is a little bit to the left, and we do have, some whites here, but the overall exposure, you'll want to play with that some until you're happy with it. I do say sometimes I'll do an edit and I'll export it, and then I'll kind of look at it for a while, and I'll come back and say, it should have been a little brighter, or maybe I made it too bright. You can always come back and adjust it and make some changes and re-export your photo. All of the edits that we're making in Lightroom are non-destructive. So all of the information tied to this image is not affecting the raw file at all. There's a whole metadata file that holds all of these adjustments, and you can come back and put everything back the way it was from the very beginning and start all over if you want. So you're not ever losing anything in terms of making these adjustments. Okay, so that's whites and blacks. Texture is brand new. I've never used it. It just came out, and I'm not even sure a whole lot about what it does. So I'm not going to talk much about it. Supposedly it adds a little bit of texture. You can kind of see what it's doing here. and that may be good, for your shot, but it starts looking a little fake if you do too much. So again, I would stress that for many of these sliders, if you make these adjustments, they're just going to be very slight, just little tiny edits and things to just bring out the quality of your of the bird. So if I ever mess with this, it would be really, really slight. Then there's the clarity slider. The clarity slider, I do use it a little bit, and it just adds, I generally, if I use it, it's +5, +10, maybe +14. We're close. I wouldn't use it a whole lot, but it's there, and it adds just a little bit of edge to your picture, and can help, bring a little bit of clarity to your subject. Dehaze, I never use it. It's kind of a strange. It does a lot of weird things, and I think that's more for maybe portrait photography and stuff like that. Next on the list, vibrance and saturation. I never use these, and I don't use them, frankly, because in my view, whenever I've tried to use them in the past, they alter the quality of the picture of the bird. They just do. They change the color of the bird too much. It's unnatural. The vibrance is really unnatural, and saturation is really unnatural. I don't use them. They're there, but again, I wouldn't recommend them. They alter and change the color from what you originally of the bird. Actually, it's just not natural. So just those edits right there, you can see just a little exposure because it was really dark. I went up 2 stops, dropped the highlights a little bit, improved the shadows, ducked the whites just a little bit, and just a touch of clarity. And we can come back here and look at sort of the before and after, right, between the 2 shots. Now let's take a look at a few other things that we can do. Now, Stephen and I talked about this, and some people, again, these are opinions, but I do this, and Stephen mentioned it too, so I wanted to show it. And you have to be careful. In this case, I'm not even sure I can do it much, because I'm going to maybe jump to another picture where this would work better. If you have a background color that is in a whole different category than the bird, you can come down here and overall change the saturation and the color of the background. Now, in this case, it's tough because this is a ruby-throated hummingbird, and there's green in the bird and there's green in the background. So this isn't going to work very well, this whole idea. So what I'm going to do is, this is kind of a really cool thing that you can do. And so what I want to do is pop over to another picture where I think this could make where we could use this. Let's see.
Maybe your nuthatch shot, Kelly.
Yeah, maybe, the nuthatch, because it's blue. That's a good one. Let's go with that one. All right, so here's some of this will be close, but we'll see. Maybe we can mess with some of this. Actually, you know what? Let's do it this way, because I know this will be like totally obvious. This is my osprey shot. I love this shot. Just barely got the wing in the frame. But you can see I've got this sort of bright blue background. So what we can do, and again, I'll show you how this works. I wouldn't necessarily use a lot of it in this shot, but this is a great one because there's no blue in the bird. So we can come down here to the color.
I usually do hue. I go to hue with that, Kelly.
Yep, I'm going to hue. So you go to the hue section and you say, you know what? I want to change. I want to see what this is. So you can either go right to the blue slider, or you can actually click this little guy right here and drag this over and just put it over your shot and click and mess with it. And you can see that in this case, it's the blue slider is the only one that's affected. right? There's no other colors in there. So again, you've got this ability to change the hue. So if you have a green, you can make it more yellow. If you have blue, you can make it slightly more green, or you could make it a little darker, right? So you have the ability to change the background a little bit without affecting your subject, without affecting the bird.
And you have to be careful because it can become fantastical pretty fast.
Totally.
Like,
yeah.
You wanna use it in a situation where like for me, most of you guys know I shoot warblers, and warblers are usually yellow, or in the case of Blackburnians, orange. And so if you have a green background, and a lot of times I'm shooting into dark backgrounds, I may want to bring it up a little bit. And if I'm on a bluebird like a cerulean or something like that, I can then, without really impacting the shot too much. That one that you're on, Kelly, is perfect.
Yeah, let's go. I'm with you.
Is that a bluebird? I couldn't tell. Yeah, the bluebird. Yeah. That's a perfect example of what I would do. And maybe you bring the U up like just 2 to 3, like 2 to 5 from 0. And just that alone, you'll notice a very nice difference.
Yeah. So on this shot, you would take the green and pull it more to the yellow side, or make it a little deeper?
I would pull it more to the right side. In this case, yeah. And if I want more of a darker effect, that's a lot of the times what I'm trying to do, because the one thing, if it's on a darker bird, you're going to see it kind of contrast in a nice way. Now, in this case, I'd probably pull it a little more lighter, just to a little bit. So there you can kind of get a little bit of a pull on it. So again, it's how you see it to season it to taste.
Yep.
But if you make a big, again, it becomes fantastical very fast, and you don't want you don't want your pictures to ever look like paintings. So totally. I think the way that I kind of look at things is you just very, very little. But that's definitely a hack that I learned from another guy that does really amazing work that I learned under, and it was one of his tricks that he showed me, and it's just something very easy, very small kind of slide.
It is. Yep. You can also, which I do sometimes, you can take the saturation, like on the green, and I won't do it all the way, but you can, especially, I mean, I've had sometimes where the green is just like so bright, it is just taking over the shot. And sometimes I will just, not a lot, just to pull it back just a hair in order to just make sure it's not overpowering the shot. So you've got the hue, the saturation. Luminance will make it lighter or darker too, which, I'm not suggesting, just to show you that you have this ability. If you've got the separation from your subject, from the bird to the background, you've got some ability to make some tiny adjustments just to kind of pull that background so it's not so far in the way, right? So it's helpful. It's really helpful, and those of us who use Lightroom will touch that a little bit here and there, right? Actually, this is a good one to keep going on. Let me pull up I'm going to kind of look at a quick edit here on this bluebird, and because this is a good one, I want to show a couple of other things on. All right, so this was a really sharp shot. So there's not a whole lot I needed to do. Now so that's the color section. Now let's go to the detail section. Let's go to sharpening. So this is Lightroom. When you import your shots, Lightroom automatically sets a sharpening of 40. And they kind of already do some basic sharpening for the image. But you can change that if you want to. I hardly ever change it. I really do. The sharpening of just sort of the base setting of is great. And if I come in 1 to 1, you can sort of see if you start pulling the slider too much, again, it's too fantastical. It doesn't, I just normally leave sharpening right at 40. But there's one important thing that I do, and that is a mask. So we have all of this great blur in the background. I don't need to sharpen that. So I can come down here and hold the Alt key and click the masking slider, and basically everything goes white that's being sharpened. And as I slide it over, you can see that the background is slowly. Now the background has no sharpening in it at all. And so a masking, in this case at 55, is telling Lightroom, look, only apply the sharpening to, this particular section, and leave the background.
Shall we run that one more time for us, because that's a really, really good hack.
Yeah, it's really important. So again, in the sharpening area, you're in sharpening, the masking section tells Lightroom what to sharpen and what not to sharpen, but you need to be able to see it, right? So holding down the Alt key and clicking this little, and then making your adjustment with the, right? If I don't hold the Alt key down, I can't see what's going on. But if I hold the Alt key down and then click on the masking slider, it shows me everything in white that's being sharpened. And I just slide until the background is black, and then let go. And now when you zoom in, right, you don't see the background is natural, right? It's not accident, it's not sharpening all of these little edges and stuff that might be in the background. And we want the background to be as blurry and out of the way as possible. So really great, important note, and I do that on all of my shots. All right, so that's sharpening. Now, let's go down. Noise reduction, I don't use it. I really, and Stephen, I don't know if you use noise reduction, but in sort of the way I try to shoot, I try and get the best possible quality out of the camera that I can. And when I do that, I just don't have a lot of noise. In fact, if I have to shoot a shot and it's really high ISO, in my opinion, trying to apply noise reduction just doesn't fix it. It's the shot has noise, and there's nothing I can really do about it, except to make sure that I try not to crop it much, right?
That's accurate. It's for a lot of my shooting. It's just the reality, especially with the kind of photography that I'm doing. It's not going to be a perfect day, and in fact, for us here, if anybody's in the New York, New Jersey area, it's been a pretty rough spring in terms of weather. So usually the way that I would shoot would be ideally first hour of the day, golden light, maybe kind of another hour into it. But we've had a lot of days where the light has not cooperated, and also, you're shooting into darker areas. So
right.
I'm on a D500, so it's going to be a little bit better in terms of, noise with ISO. But I'm usually, in certain cases, over 2,000 ISO with what I'm doing. So there is going to be a need for the slider. And I will tell you this, I don't ever go over the slider. So if I'm at 40 or 35 with sharpening, I never go over that with noise reduction. And I don't know if there's any fact behind that or actual study or anything, but I just have noticed that if I start to click the luminance past the sharpening amount, I do notice that it tends to really take away from the sharpening of the shot. So I want to try to keep it generally. I will rarely go over 20 on my luminance on it, and then really with detail, I will just tend to use that at lower, again, because my shot doesn't need if the shot is sharp, really all you're trying to do is just take away the noise and the pixels off of the shot. So from my own experience,
yeah,
I'm really just kind of doing that so I don't have that excess noise. But it is definitely a really good tool. I've tried a couple of other ones, the Google Nik package.
Right.
I tried DxO on their noise reduction, and they're all great, but I feel like built in, the Lightroom option is a really good tool. And like I said, I generally will not go over 20 is usually kind of where I leave it on there, and it seems to take care of on a D500 up to 2000. I usually can clean it up pretty good. But unfortunately, noise is going to be a part of what we do, especially if you're in darker weather. You'd rather get the shot with noise than have a blurry shot and not get the shot at all.
Yep. Okay, cool. So you've talked me, and I'm going to start playing with this then. So I haven't reused it much, but there you go from Stephen. He uses it, so it can help. It can help, with a little bit of noise, and if you've got a higher ISO. In this case, I have an ISO of 200 on this particular shot. So. But it can make a difference. In this case, I don't see a lot of difference because I'm already at ISO 200. So let me just check these two. It's not going to make much of a difference, again, with my particular lens. Now, let's go through a couple of, now let's say we kind of have the shot. We've made our basic adjustments in terms of exposure and our recovering the shadows and maybe making a little adjustment here. We've adjusted sharpening. Now we've kind of done that. The next thing that I start to look at is, what am I going to do with this particular shot? I may come back and look at the crop. And what I'm going to do here, just for grins here, is I'm going to make this a portrait shot. All right. So one of the things that you do notice, and I'm back to the crop tool here, is that the crop tool automatically puts your rule of thirds in. There are a whole bunch of other ones, and you can actually come to tools and do let's see. Yeah, crop guide overlay, and you can switch this to other types of ones. But for me, pretty much the rule of thirds works, and so I don't necessarily pick some of these other ones. But it'll change it'll give you a different sort of overlay if you want to, use that. But anyway, so I typically just use the rule of thirds. So I'm not going to overly do this here, but basically I'm going to pick something like that. Right. So I've decided that's kind of where I want to be. Now let's go down and let's talk about vignetting. So vignetting is this idea that you can create either a light or a dark vignette around the image to show you sort of what that looks like. If I push the vignette all the way over, I can kind of shrink it down, and you can see, look at that. So I'm just pulling in the vignette in and around the bird. Obviously that looks terrible, but by pushing the amount all the way and then just kind of adjusting the midpoint, you can sort of adjust feathering and some other things too. You get an idea of where it's going to be affecting the image. And then if you double click these, they all go back to 0. Then I'll typically, just to try it, I'll come back and just touch it. And one of the things, I heard this some while back, and I've always sort of adhered to it. The best vignette is the one you don't see, the one you don't notice, right? So if you use vignetting, it can just kind of draw your attention to your subject, right? But it doesn't overly look fake, right? So you can play with that. This is generally, I'll adjust this just a little bit, and it's just there to, you get it just a little bit. It's not a lot, just a touch to try and draw your eye from sort of the darker more to the lighter parts of the image. So that's vignetting. You can go darker or you can go lighter. but again, that's typically all I do, just enough to draw your yourself into the image. And so that is kind of a nearly finished image. Now I want to show you one more thing that I might do. I don't always do this, but this is more advanced. Before I run into the adjustment brush tool, Stephen, do you have anything else you want to talk about up to now? Because I'm going to get ready to jump to the adjustment brush and kind of talk through that. And it's a little bit of a deeper kind of thing if you're not used to it. So I want to spend a little bit of time on it, but I think it could help some people.
No, I am all with you. The adjustment brush is one of my favorite tools, so I'm looking forward to hearing what you're going to talk about.
Okay, so the adjustment brush, we're going to come up here and I'm going to click it. And when I click the adjustment brush, I get kind of like a whole nother set of adjustments here. And these adjustments that I have here, I'm going to put all these back. These adjustments are only going to affect what I select. So one of the things that I do sometimes in my photos, you guys are going to look at my photos and go, oh my gosh, Kelly used the adjustment brush. One of the things, so let's talk about the different components of the shot. I have the background. I have this eastern bluebird, and I've got the perch, right? The perch, the thing that he's hanging on, right? This piece of wood here. One of the things that we've done up to this point is we've made adjustments to try and really bring out and highlight the bird, and we've kind of made some slight adjustments to the background and a little bit of vignetting to draw our eyes to the bird. But frankly, for me, this wood is a little boring. I wonder if there's something I can do to kind of punch that perch up a little bit. So I'm going to use this adjustment brush, and basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to select basically the wood, and then I'm going to come over here and make some adjustments and see if I can kind of spruce it up a little bit. This doesn't always work, by the way, but sometimes it does. So let me just show you a little bit of how this works. When you select the adjustment brush, you have a size and you have a feather, and there's also something called auto mask. So let's talk about each one. The size, if you've got a mouse, you can scroll the little scroll thing in the middle between your two buttons, and you can make this larger or smaller. And the feather says how hard am I picking, right? So for example, if I put this out here like this and I drag it over the wood, I'm selecting part of the wood. Now I can't see it. There's a couple of ways you can actually see what you're selecting. One is you come down here and say show selected mask overlay, and you pick that, and it's going to highlight in red basically everything I selected. And you can see there's this feather, right, where it's kind of deep dark and then it slowly fades. But I'm trying to get a pretty hard line on this perch here, and I don't want it to go overboard here. So what I'm going to do is pull the feather way, way back, and I'm just going to select this perch. Now, you're going to say, which is absolutely true, gosh, Kelly, you went over the lines. Right, we're going to talk about that in just a second. So, but I've just kind of highlighted the wood here, but it's not perfect, right? Oh, I just went way over there. Look at that. I ruined it. No, I'm just kidding. But I went over, right? So what you can do then, and once you've selected it, you kind of got your basic selection there, you can come back to select your auto mask, click erase, and I'll use a little bit of feathering here, but basically what I'm going to do is when I click, Lightroom is going to say, oh, you're over green. So I'm now erasing everything that's not green, or erasing everything that's over green, right? So basically, it's hard to do it on the bird here, but up here, right, boom, boom, boom. So I just clean that up. Now, to clean up right where the bird is, it's a little more difficult. So you can always kind of zoom in and come in here and clean up some of this. It doesn't have to be, again, I want to say, you know, when we're using this particular idea here, we're not going to do super drastic changes to this background. You can make this a little smaller. Again, it'll just take you a couple minutes, right, to just select what it is you want to select. And we'll come here, just make sure this is kind of clean. It's not the end of the world. If we're a little off, we can always come back and clean it up. You can go really small here if you want and kind of clean this little spot up. Okay, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. We've got a decent selection now on this particular perch. It's not perfect, but it's enough for me to show you what to do. Now that I've got that selected, I can come over here and I can mess with things, right? And what I will typically do is I will come down here to clarity and boost the clarity. Sometimes I'll boost the sharpness a little bit, and I will mess with the blacks just a little bit, and maybe the exposure. That's way like not the exposure, the highlights. I'll pull the highlights down a little bit. I might bring the highlights up a little bit. Sometimes I play different things to see. Maybe pulling the shadows down is a little deeper, you know, it's a little cooler, a little more interesting, and maybe just a little more of the black. There, right? So that let's say done. Now let's take a look at the sort of the before and after. See? So just little darker, a little more texture, a little cooler to look at. Bang. And then there's the edit. There's sort of my final edit on that particular portrait shot. All right. Any questions about that? But that's the idea. You can do all kinds of things with the adjustment brush. Let me go to, I don't want to. You can also do things, and I've done this from time to time, and you've got to be really careful with this, but let me show you. Let me go back to let's go back here. I'll show you another adjustment brush thing. Now, in this particular case, I wouldn't do this for this shot, but I'm just going to use it as an example. Here's our Carolina chickadee here. I'm going to take the adjustment brush, and I'm going to feather it quite a lot here. I'm going to shrink it. And see this, and again, I wouldn't necessarily do this, but there's this little kind of dark area. I'm just going to show you the kind of the idea. So I can come in here and just kind of, just a touch. Now I don't, again, when I would normally do this, where I would normally use this, is if you just, the shot is, there's so much dark and you got to pull up something just really specific in order to kind of even something out. You can do that, but again, I would caution you, we don't want to end up with anything that's unnatural. But in this case, just to show you an example, so I could come over here and maybe just touch the exposure up, right? So I just adjusted and just lightened that little section up. It was a very slight thing. Again, on this particular shot, I wouldn't have done it, but you get the idea of what you can use the adjustment brush for. You can use it for anything. You could, you can come in here and say, okay, I'm done with that. If you ever have, an eye of the bird, again, if it's just not quite where you need it to be, you could potentially lighten up the eye just a touch, maybe. But again,
definitely it's one of the things that I will carefully do is just lightening up the eye a little bit because you don't want it to look fake. Exactly. And trust me, people notice it. But
they do.
When you have a darker eye, especially if you have the light on the eye like you do, the ring right there,
yep,
on the white, I'll just generally carefully try to bring the rest of the lighter brown around. Again, it's very, very minimal, and really, like if it looks fake, you're not gonna like it, and people will notice it. But if you do just a smidge, Lightroom is great with that, and that's something that I would that I often do. And before we move on, Kelly, I saw Marianne had a question about, did you use contrast on the edit? So I'm not quite sure what in which edit you were talking.
Yeah,
she was talking about.
Let's deal with that. So my opinion. So let's finish this thought because and then we'll Marianne will come back to your question. So what I just did there is I highlighted the eye and I just touched the exposure a little bit, and then I hit the white just to bring out that glint, just a tiny bit, right? And there, and there you have it. In this particular situation, again, we might choose to do a slightly offset image like that, or we might say, gosh, we love this. If you drag this vertical, it'll turn into a portrait, and we can, maybe do a portrait on it. So any number of ways that you might want to change that, and you can, once you have your edits, you can always come back, and like I said, I will come back, and sometimes I'll make a portrait and export the portrait. I'll come back and make a 4:3, export that. I'll come back and do a 5:7, export that. So, and maybe a 16:9 if I want to do a screensaver, just so that I've got all of those basic formats covered before I close up shop for that particular image. So, anyway, just a note, adjustment brush, use it sparingly, but it can be really cool in a couple of different ways. And for me, it's just a few tiny little, pulling out some shadows, maybe a little glint, and then I mainly use it for perches, right? Just to try and make that perch just a little cooler to look at. Marianne, back to your question. Do I mess with contrast? Effectively, contrast is a big generic highlight, shadow, white, black, all in one slider. And in the way I typically edit is I'm using all of these individual ones to get what I want, and I don't typically mess with contrast. Sometimes I will get the bird exactly the way I want it, and I might just play around with contrast to see if that helps, right? In this case, that may help a little bit. You got to be careful with it, but yes, the short answer is I typically will use contrast at the very end after I've kind of done all of my adjustments. I'll come back to contrast and then play with that to see if that makes a little bit different. And I like that, actually. So it's a really good, a really great question, and I will typically use it at the end.
So you use it at the very end of your workflow, and I tend to use it in the beginning of my workflow.
Yeah. So there you go.
It's a very, again, I think the one thing that Kelly really kind of drilled down is that it's a very personal way that when you're doing a workflow. So everybody's going to have their own workflow, and for the most part, I almost think that the way that Lightroom kind of drills it down is almost a good workflow. I do a couple of things a little bit backwards from the way that it's laid out, but I tend to always work exposure with contrast, especially if I have a shot where it's a little bit, like where there's less of like a clean background like this. I think sometimes you can kind of set the background apart from the bird and the subject when you lower. So if you went to a minus number, I'll tend to do that with more of a noisier background.
Right.
Again, with doing it, Kelly's using the best pictures. So, I come back from being out in the field and I've got so much work to do. So next time we do this, I'll be the guinea pig, and I'll show kind of what my own workflow is. But a lot of the shots that I tend to do, there's some editing that I'll end up doing to kind of almost separate the bird from the background just because of the environments. Kelly's in a different environment where, the perfect shot, obviously, from where you are to where the subject is to the background,
right?
Like this, that the downy that Kelly's putting up. what I would do in that case is I might try sliding the contrast down just a smidge. You don't want it to do too much because then, it'll start to look a little fake. But just a little bit there kind of almost creates a little bit more separation. So that's one of the, hacks that I tend to use when I'm editing. When you have a clean background, there's very little when you get that magical shot, you're like, oh my gosh, everything is green, and you've got that perfect distance. But it's very few and far between. Especially with warblers, the way that we tend to shoot them, especially when you want them low, there's always going to be some amount of background. So what you want to do is to try to create that distance without it looking like it's fake. That's right. The one thing, you have to be the best judge for your own workflow and kind of looking at it and almost having, I have a few friends that I tend to send my pictures to before just to kind of get a barometer of, hey, is this a good shot or not if I don't know, especially when you're working on something. I don't know if, Kelly, you tend to do this, but with Lightroom, I may come back to a shot. Something's not perfect until you get it right. So I tend to have a couple of people that I will send shots to to kind of use that. And it could be anything from framing the shot for cropping to the all the little nuances. But for me to kind of run back to where we just started on this, contrast for me in workflow is one of the first things. So the one thing that I would just kind of convey to everybody is you're going to have your own workflow, and kind of using some of these hints and working them in is really the key in becoming an expert in editing. See, I think what did you just do with the clarity slider?
Well, clarity was actually all the way up, so I was pulling it back down because I had already messed with it. So almost in a way where you brought it a little bit down, kind of clean that background up, and it gave you a little bit, and in a way, it kind of does almost look a little fantastical in the sense where you have that perfect green background. But to me, I like that to the right of the perch, having those branches there, it kind of creates an environment. Right. So you don't want to always lose, you don't want to not have that in there. To me, in my own shots, you don't want to just have always a clean green background. You want to try to strive for having that background where you have some environment in there, because that's what's going to make and show, that you're, not shooting from, at a zoo or something. Right, totally,
It gives the bird character. It shows, the bird has an environment, and I think that in composition, and that's a whole other, time for us to kind of hop on another one of these is to talk about composition.
Right,
but,
sure.
Using Lightroom to set this all up, I think can help set the table with your composition.
Yep, totally. One thing that I learned that I'm also kind of pass along here, and I found this out I'm going to show you this, to figure out what some of these sliders do. I pulled up just a color chart, and let me see which. This is the one. So I brought up this color chart, and I came down here and I wanted to show you one thing. Why sometimes you got to be careful. The clarity slider, if you look at what it's doing to the colors, you can see that it is really accentuating the purples, the sort of the dark purples on this end. There's a little bit of a bubble on the red and on the green, and then another big hop here on the blues. And so what's happening when you adjust clarity, you got to be careful with it. You're increasing the blues, and what that can do in your shot, and sometimes I end up doing this, or at least being careful of it. I don't see it so much on this particular shot, but I'll highlight it as an example. Depending on the sky and a little bit of the reflections of what's going on, you might have a bird that has, this is all supposed to be white, and if you push clarity too much, you're going to start seeing blue, right? And I'll show you where it's showing up here. If I come to saturation, you can see there's actually blue color in all these little wing spots right here. So one of the things that I do watch, if I use a little bit of clarity, and this, I'm way over exaggerating here, but just a note, if I use a little bit of clarity, if I've got white in the bird, I'll come down, and sometimes occasionally I've had to come in to the saturation on the blue and just duck the blue a little bit to make sure that I'm not drawing blues into the picture where it doesn't belong. So just a little note there, all these sliders are messing with colors, and the goal here is to just tiny adjustments to improve the photograph and the view and the quality of your shot. So again, just a little note there on what clarity's doing, and that's Lightroom. Now, when we're done, like let's take this particular shot here. We want to export it, right? Because we want to share it on Facebook. So you come down and and like I said, there's a million things you can do with Lightroom. These are the only ones that I pretty much touch. File export, and then it brings up this little export menu, and I've got a folder that I use. In this case, I'm saving it into my photography, Nikon Bird Photographers Lightroom Training Shots folder, and I'm saving the file as custom name - original file number. So if I come in here and put Downy Woodpecker, you can see that the actual file name it's going to save on my computer is Downy-3219. Okay, this 3219 is the Nikon number of the NEF file, and you definitely want to keep that in the name of the file so that you can match these up later if you need to for any reason. I will, just in my workflow, I will typically do a -L if I'm saving it as landscape. I'll do a -P if I'm saving it as portrait, and if I'm doing a 16:9, I will do a -W, and if I'm doing a square, I'll do a S for square, SQ for square. In this case, it's a landscape shot, so I'm saving it as Downy-L 3219. And one other thing that you want to make sure is that you're saving it as JPEG and the quality is all the way over to 100. Right? And then you click export. And when you click export, there's a little slider up here, and you can see it just filled in, and it's done. All right, so now that is done. If I come over, I use PaintShop Pro as a sort of a post-processing view of all of my my shots here. You can see that this Downy landscape shot is now in this folder. All right, and I can zoom in and it's all set. Now I don't have a watermark on here. We can talk a little bit about watermarking. Lightroom has its own little watermarking option. I personally don't use that because it kind of just sticks it in one corner or another, and I tend to be very specific about where I want my watermarks, and I want to make sure they're kind of hidden and not too big and not too small, and so I actually add my watermarks using PaintShop Pro. But I don't know, Stephen, how do you use the Lightroom watermarks?
I do.
Okay.
I do, and why I tend to like it is because I have some presets, and you can do this with Lightroom on where you want it to go. So generally for me, I have left and pretty much left, or bottom right. So in a case like this, I would probably put my watermark on the bottom right, exactly where you're pointing to.
That's where I would put
in there. And it usually, it defaults, you can set how far you want it off. I don't necessarily want to have it be too big in my case. I just want it on there. Again, if the photo gets shared, you want to know that it's your shot. I've
Right.
had a couple of shots go viral. You want that on there. There's no real, we can talk about watermarks until we're blue in the face. Some people are for it, some people are against it. That's not the conversation.
Right.
But I do think it is important to have a watermark on your shot for just those reasons, for identification.
Yep. There was one other thing I wanted to just touch on very briefly, and I don't use it a lot, but sometimes I do. In this particular shot, I think I had some spots on my sensor, and they show up here. They're just little things that are kind of annoying. And you can use this little spot removal tool to it's not perfect, but you can come down here and just basically do that.
Clone it out.
And it's gone. Right, not perfect necessarily, but you can use it, right? And you can sort of feather it a little bit depending on how big it is. And Lightroom will do its best to try and find a place to blend in and hide those things. So if you've got some...
the clone tool in Lightroom for my own, because I will be the first to admit, I do use it very. It's actually toward the top of my own personal workflow.
Yep.
Even like so for me, and I apologize, I was stuck on the New Jersey Turnpike, so I don't know if you got into this when you guys started, but for me, I will actually clone and do that necessary editing for me first. I will tend to try to use the heal option versus the clone. Because the clone really becomes then you're going to, especially if you're using it in a background or a green background, you're going to want to have everything match up, and it's very difficult to do that. So then you're feathering it in, and then you're kind of lessening it. So it then becomes like you're spending a lot more time than you need to be. But I would tend to go for the heal option first before using the clone option. But they're both very powerful.
Yep.
In certain cases, I'll use Photoshop if I really get into certain things, and that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
Right.
I will typically, I'll drop into Photoshop if I've got to like remove a whole branch or something that is just really kind of annoying and it serves no purpose, and Photoshop can sometimes do a little bit better.
But to kind of utilize the cloning and the heal option on Lightroom, it's very powerful. And if you put the time in, you can do some pretty great stuff. If it does become overwhelming and daunting, then you bring it into Photoshop and we get into layers. And again, that's another hour and a half topic down the road.
Yeah, totally. Yep. So that's and he's talking about you click the little spot removal tool and you've got a healing and clone options here. They're just different algorithms for fixing things. So, but I didn't hit that before, and I just wanted to make sure that we touched on it. And it's good to fix little imperfections, especially in the background, things like that.
I had a situation where just little things like in the background where. For me, I tend to kind of be over analytical with my shots, sometimes to a negative fault, but I will try to get everything as clean and so literally, like if there's something with attracting like a spider web or a bug flying, or God forbid I get the dust on the sensor issue like Kelly has, I will literally just sit there and kind of stare. But I think for those things, it's a powerful tool. Yep.
Yeah, totally. But you can see in this shot how these are kind of annoying. They're there and they don't, and so you can fix that kind of stuff pretty easily. So that's Lightroom. That's what you get.
So I think. Kelly, if you're kind of on the back end of this, I just wanted to maybe open it up to anybody with any questions. Richard, thanks for participating. If anybody has any questions for Kelly, if you've got any comments or anything, please, please type it in, and would love to have Kelly answer all of your guys' questions.
Anyone at all.
Right. Otherwise, Kelly's going to be tap dancing, and you don't want that.
You don't want to see me tap dancing. That's right.
Yeah.
So, all right, I'm just waiting here, but just so you guys know, our plan, Stephen and I have talked about this, to run some more sessions. We would love to hear from you. What would you like to see? We've got our ideas. I mean, clearly we heard, let's talk about Lightroom. Let's talk about Lightroom a bunch. And so I wanted to tackle that one. Depending on the nature of the topic, we'll either I'll do it or Stephen, or we'll get somebody else maybe to drive it.
The old Lightroom classic. Yeah, that's a Kelly question, because there's so many versions that of Lightroom right now.
I'm actually running Lightroom Classic. So just so you were aware, Adobe updates both Lightroom Classic and Lightroom CC or Lightroom Cloud. They both do basically the same things. They're slightly different. One is just running through a browser. I personally like running local on my local machine. So I downloaded the Lightroom Classic, and everything I've showed you today is Lightroom Classic. So just because it has the word classic doesn't mean it's old, or it doesn't have all the latest and greatest stuff in it. It's just classic for them is the on computer version, which is the one I use actually. It's a good question.
Thank you, Marianne. Appreciate the nice words.
Well, good. I'm glad you guys got something out of it. All right.
So yeah. So in closing on my end, for me, we definitely plan on doing more of these kind of things. I'd like to bring in. I have a couple of friends of mine that are ambassadors from other brands. I myself am a part of the Sigma influencer team. So I have some friends from Sigma, some friends from Tamron. I actually know someone at Nikon. I'd like to bring them on to do some stuff with us. But it's all a work in progress. But for me, I just wanted to thank Kelly. This was a fantastic presentation. Really, really grateful to have you put this together for us.
But Stephen, thanks so much for running the whole channel. We're gonna create a Google YouTube channel. I think Stephen, that's what I'd like to do for the Nikon first. So all these videos that we do, you don't have one place to put them there, and then you can just go and watch them, right? We've already had some folks in Europe who couldn't make this that would like to watch it. So. We appreciate your time and all of your encouragement, and we want to continue to make this a really just a great group on Facebook, and you guys make it great, and I'm thrilled just to even play a tiny little part with such amazing photographers. So thank you all, and we appreciate it. You guys take care, and we'll post this, and I'll post a link at some point as soon as I get it all packaged up and uploaded into YouTube. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Have a great night, everybody.
Take care. You guys. Bye.